Here is the brutal truth that nobody in the casino industry wants to say out loud. The most dangerous man to ever walk the Las Vegas Strip did not wear a cowboy hat. He wore a business suit, carried a balance sheet, and he never once pretended to love this city. He came to extract, not to build. And by the time he was done, some of the most iconic names in Vegas history were either demolished or left to rot on some of the most valuable real estate on Earth. Hi, my name is Michael, and this is Old Vegas Legends. Who is Carl Icahn, really? To understand what Carl Icahn did to Las Vegas, you first have to understand what Carl Icahn does to everything. Born in 1936 in Queens, New York, Icahn did not grow up rich. He grew up sharp. He studied philosophy at Princeton, started on Wall Street as a broker. Most companies are run by people who are more interested in protecting their own jobs than in maximizing the value of the business. And if you could buy enough stock in one of those companies, you could force your way into the boardroom and do whatever you wanted. That strategy has a name: corporate raiding. Now, the term sounds dramatic, and honestly, it should. A corporate raider is not an investor in the traditional sense. They are not buying into a company because they believe in its mission or its long-term potential. And they are buying in because they see a gap between what a company is worth on paper and what it could yield if you stripped it down to the bones, sold off the parts, paid down the debt, and walked away. Imagine you buy an old house, not because you want to live in it, but because you want to tear out the copper pipes, sell the appliances, lease the land, and flip the empty shell. That is corporate raiding, and Carl Icahn became the undisputed master of it. By the 1980s, Wall Street had a nickname for him: the Icahn Lift. The moment he bought a significant stake in your company, the stock price went up. Not because he was going to make the company better, but because Wall Street knew he was going to shake it apart and force a payout. Shareholders loved him. So, what happens when a man like that sets his sights on Las Vegas? The sands and the setup. The first time Carl Icahn's name entered the Las Vegas conversation in any serious way was in the early 1990s, and even then, the move was less about building something and more about positioning for leverage. But let me give you the context. By the late 1980s, Las Vegas was in a fascinating and fragile moment of transition. The old mob-connected era was finally definitively over. The corporate era was just beginning. Steve Wynn had opened the Mirage in 1989 and proved to the world that Las Vegas could be a legitimate luxury destination. Oh, the city was evolving at breathtaking speed, and whenever an industry is in transition, that is exactly when predators circle. Icahn began quietly accumulating positions in distressed gaming assets, not because he loved the casino business. If you have ever read any of his interviews from this period, the man could not have cared less about blackjack or showgirls. What he saw was real estate, liquidity, cash flow. Here is what the casual observer misses about casinos as financial instruments. A casino is not just an entertainment business. It is a heavily leveraged real estate play sitting on top of a cash-generating machine. When those two elements get out of alignment, when the debt load outpaces the cash flow, the property becomes vulnerable. And vulnerable properties were Carl Icahn's natural habitat. He was not coming to Vegas to be a casino operator. He was coming because distressed casinos were, at that moment in history, some of the most exploitable assets in America. The property that had once hosted the Rat Pack, that had been the glamorous beating heart of old Las Vegas, was already a ghost of itself by this point. And Icahn was watching, studying, waiting for his moment. That moment would come. But first, he needed a smaller stage to test his playbook: the Stratosphere acquisition. If you have ever stood at the far northern end of the Las Vegas Strip and looked up at that giant needle poking into the Nevada sky, you have seen the monument to one of the great financial disasters in Vegas history, the Stratosphere Tower. Bob Stupak, the eccentric, beloved, slightly unhinged showman who built it, dreamed of something that would stop traffic from 100 miles away. And to be fair, the tower itself is genuinely impressive, but the hotel and casino wrapped around its base, that was another story entirely. The project nearly bankrupted Stupak, went through a formal Chapter 11 reorganization in 1997, and landed, bruised and broken, in the hands of Carl Icahn. Now, here is where I want you to pay very close attention, because this is where the playbook becomes visible for the first time. When Icahn took control of the Stratosphere, the narrative in the press was cautiously optimistic. A savvy businessman was stepping in to rescue a troubled property. Maybe under serious adult supervision, the Stratosphere could finally become what it was supposed to be. That is not what happened. What happened was a masterclass in minimum viable investment. Icahn stabilized the debt structure, which is genuinely important and should not be dismissed. But he did not invest in the property in any meaningful way. He did not renovate the rooms. He did not upgrade the casino floor. He did not try to compete with the mega resorts that were exploding onto the Strip. The Stratosphere under Icahn became exactly what corporate Las Vegas has perfected ever since. A cash extraction device wearing the costume of a hotel. Keep the lights on, keep the doors open, keep the resort fees climbing, and spend as close to zero as humanly possible on the actual guest experience. And here is the kicker. Because the Stratosphere sits at the far northern end of the Strip, away from the major foot traffic, its customer base skewed heavily toward budget travelers and locals, people on fixed incomes, retirees, working-class visitors who had stretched their savings for a Vegas weekend. These were the exact people that old Las Vegas was built to serve, at prices that were quietly creeping upward every single year. The Stratosphere was not a rescue. It was a slow bleed dressed up in press releases. But if the Stratosphere showed you what Icahn was capable of, the Frontier Hotel, a murder in slow motion. I want you to stop for a moment and really absorb this number. 2,034 days. That is how long the strike at the Frontier Hotel lasted. From September of 1991 to February of 1998. 6 years, 4 months, and 10 days. The longest strike in the history of the American hotel and casino industry. And at the center of it, unmoved, unyielding, and apparently unbothered, was Paul Icahn. The Frontier, which had been operating in various forms since 1942, was acquired by Icahn, and he immediately set about restructuring labor costs. The Culinary Workers Union refused to accept his terms, so they walked out. And Icahn let them stand on that picket line for over 6 years. Think about what that means for a human being. 6 years of walking in circles outside a building, 6 years of financial stress, of watching your savings drain away, of explaining to your children why you cannot cross that line. 6 years of holding on to something because you believed that what you were fighting for was bigger than your own comfort. Meanwhile, Icahn replaced the striking workers with non-union employees and kept the casino operating. He did not negotiate in good faith. He did not blink. He had done the math, and the math told him that waiting out the workers was cheaper than meeting their demands. I want to be very clear about something here, and I say this not as a political statement, but as a simple observation of human decency. Those workers were not asking for luxury. They were asking for fair wages, reasonable benefits, and basic protections. The kinds of things that let a person build a life in the city they help run every single day. Icahn's response was to outlast them, and when the Frontier was eventually sold in 1998, the deal required the new owners to recognize the union and reach a contract. The workers went back inside, but the building itself was demolished in 2007, wiped off the map like it had never existed. A landmark since 1942, gone. And the people who had sacrificed 6 years of their lives to fight for it. They won their union rights, yes, but they won them in a building that no longer stands. All the playbook exposed. By now, a pattern should be forming in your mind. And I want to make it explicit because this is the heart of everything. Paul Icahn did not stumble into Las Vegas and accidentally cause damage. The damage was the strategy. Let me walk you through the playbook step by step. Step 1. Identify a distressed asset. A property carrying too much debt, mismanaged, or caught in a transitional moment in the industry. Casinos in the 1990s were full of these. Step 2. Acquire control either through debt purchases, stock accumulation, or direct acquisition. The key is to get whooshed in at a price that reflects the distress, not the potential. Step 3. Restructure the debt. This is the part that gets Icahn the most credit in financial press. And to be honest, it is the part that requires genuine skill. He was very good at this. Step 4. Cut operational costs to the bone. Labor is the biggest line item, so labor takes the hardest hit. This is where the workers feel it. This is where the guest experience starts to quietly deteriorate. Step 5. Extract whatever cash flow the property generates, not reinvesting it, not improving the product, extracting it. Step 6. Either sell the asset once it has been stabilized and the debt restructured, or hold it as a depreciating cash cow until the land value justifies demolition. Notice what is missing from that playbook. There is no step that says invest in the experience. There is no step that says treat this place like it matters beyond its balance sheet. Because to Carl Icahn, it did not. And that is not a moral judgment. That is just the truth of the model. What it means for the Las Vegas dream. Here is where I have to ask you something uncomfortable. Is Carl Icahn the villain of this story? Or is he just the most honest version of a character that has taken over this entire city? Because look around the Strip in 2025. The same playbook that Icahn was running in the 90s is now the operating standard for MGM, Caesars Entertainment, for every major corporate landlord on Las Vegas Boulevard. Yeah, and the industry watched, took notes, and decided it was the future. What has been lost is harder to put on a balance sheet, and that is exactly why no one in the boardroom talks about it. What has been lost is the reason people fell in love with Las Vegas in the first place. The feeling that this city was built for you, that the house had the edge, sure, but the game was fair, that the person behind the front desk knew your name, that a weekend here was a genuine escape, not a financial ambush dressed up in neon. The workers who stood on that Frontier Hotel picket line for over 6 years understood something that the corporate strategists apparently cannot quantify. A casino is not just a building, it is a relationship between the city and its workers. It is between the dream that Vegas sells and the reality it delivers. When you treat that relationship as a liability, when you reduce it to a series of fees and cuts and extracted margins, you do not just hurt the workers. You kill the thing that made the whole enterprise worth anything in the first place. So, let us end where we started. With the brutal truth, Carl Icahn looked at Las Vegas and saw exactly what it was. Not a dream, not a legacy, not an American institution. He saw a collection of leveraged assets sitting on appreciating desert land, operated by people who were more sentimental than strategic. And in that narrow, cold, purely financial sense, he was not wrong. The Stratosphere had terrible fundamentals. The Frontier was bleeding money. Man, the people running these properties had made serious mistakes, and the balance sheets showed it. But here is what Icahn's balance sheet could never show. The cost of what you lose when you run a place like it has no soul. The cost of 6 years of workers on a picket line. The cost of a building that stood since 1942 being reduced to a pile of rubble. The cost of a guest who came to Vegas with excitement and left feeling like they had been processed. Those costs are real. They just do not show up until it is too late. And that, more than any single deal or acquisition or demolition, is Carl Icahn's true legacy in Las Vegas. He showed the entire industry that you could treat this city like a machine and still make money for a while. The question is, what happens to the city when everyone decides to run it the same way? That is the story of Carl Icahn and Las Vegas. And honestly, I find myself a little angry every time I go through the details of the Frontier strike. 6 years. Let that number sit with you. If this kind of deep dive into the real history behind these iconic properties is what you come here for, then make sure you subscribe to Old Vegas Legends because we are just getting started. There are stories on this strip that the corporate press releases will never tell you, and it is my job to make sure you hear them. Next week we are going inside another chapter that the industry would rather you forget. Until then, watch your wallet, and remember, the house always has the edge, but it did not used to feel quite so personal.